The silent observer. The quantum effect of watching your thoughts. There is a silent presence inside you. It has no voice, yet it hears every word in your mind. It has no form, yet it witnesses every emotion you feel. It does not panic when fear appears. It does not celebrate when pleasure arrives. It simply watches. Right now, as you listen to these words, thoughts are passing through your awareness. Some thoughts may be about this moment. Some may be about your plans later today. Some may be doubts. Some may be memories. And yet, behind all of them, there is something quietly observing, a still awareness that notices each thought as it comes and goes. And this raises a question that may change the way you understand reality itself. Who is the one watching your thoughts? This question is ancient. Mystics asked it. Philosophers contemplated it. Neuroscientists investigate it. And surprisingly, modern quantum physics may offer one of the most fascinating metaphors for understanding it, because in the strange world of quantum mechanics, the act of observation changes reality. This is known as the observer effect. At the quantum level, particles do not behave like solid objects. Instead, they exist as probabilities. A particle can behave like a wave, spread out across many possible locations at once. It is not fixed. It is not determined. It exists as potential. But when it is observed, something extraordinary happens. The wave collapses. The probabilities disappear. One reality emerges. Possibility becomes an event. This is one of the most mysterious discoveries in modern science. Observation appears to affect matter itself. And while the quantum observer effect is often misunderstood, its symbolic power is undeniable. Attention changes outcomes. Now imagine applying that principle inward. Imagine that your thoughts are like quantum waves. Unstable. Fluid. Potential. A thought arises, perhaps fear, anger, anxiety, desire. Before it is observed, it exists as raw potential. But what happens when awareness turns toward it? What happens when the silent observer inside you notices the thought without becoming it? This is where psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative wisdom begin to meet, because the moment you observe a thought, you interrupt its automatic power. Most people live identified with thought. They do not observe anger. They become anger. They do not observe anxiety. They become anxiety. They do not observe fear. They become fear. A thought appears, and identity fuses with it instantly. The mind says, I am afraid, I am stressed, I am broken, I am not enough. And because the thought is not observed, it is accepted as reality. But the moment awareness steps back and notices the thought, something changes. Instead of, I am anxious, there is anxiety is appearing. Instead of, I am angry, there is anger is present. This may seem like a subtle difference, but psychologically, it is enormous. Because when awareness observes thought, identity separates from thought. And once identity separates from thought, thought loses its absolute authority. This is the beginning of freedom. Modern neuroscience supports this. Research in mindfulness and meta-awareness shows that when people observe their thoughts non-judgmentally, activity in the brain's emotional reactivity systems begins to decrease. The amygdala, the brain region involved in fear responses, becomes less reactive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious regulation, becomes more active. In simple terms, when you observe thought, your brain changes. This is not mystical poetry. This is measurable. Observation reorganizes neural activity. The act of witnessing alters the internal system. And this is why the metaphor of quantum observation is so powerful. Just as observation changes the behavior of particles, conscious awareness changes the behavior of thought. The thought may still arise, but its structure changes under awareness. Its emotional intensity weakens. Its automatic momentum slows. Its grip loosens. Fearful thought observed is not the same as a fearful thought believed. An angry thought witnessed is not the same as an angry thought embodied. The silent observer transforms the experience. And perhaps the deepest transformation is this: Observation reveals that you are not your thoughts for most of life. We assume that the voice in the mind is me. The constant inner commentary feels personal. It feels intimate. It feels like identity itself. But if you can observe the voice, then the voice cannot be the observer. If you can witness thought, then thought is an object in awareness. And what sees the object cannot be the object. This realization is simple, but revolutionary. Because once you discover that thoughts are events in consciousness rather than definitions of self, reality begins to shift. Imagine standing beside a river. Leaves float past on the water. Each leaf is a thought. One says, "You will fail." Another says, "You are not enough." Another says, "Something bad will happen." Most people jump into the river. They grab the leaves. They are carried away by them. But the observer remains on the shore. The observer sees the leaves without becoming the leaves. This is what awareness does. It creates space. And in that space, choice appears. Without awareness, thought becomes destiny. With awareness, thought becomes information. This is the essence of the silent observer. And this shift affects more than emotional well-being. It affects behavior, and behavior shapes reality. Consider anxiety. If an anxious thought arises unconsciously, it triggers emotion. Emotion influences action. Action produces outcome. The thought, "I am going to fail," creates tension. Tension reduces performance. Reduced performance creates failure. The thought becomes reality, not because thought magically manipulates the universe, but because thought shapes the internal conditions that shape action. Now, imagine the same thought observed. There is fear of failure. This observation reduces identification. Reduced identification lowers emotional reactivity. Lower reactivity improves action. Improved action changes outcome. Reality changes because awareness changed a chain reaction. This is the practical quantum metaphor. Observation collapses unconscious patterns. The silent observer interrupts the automatic cascade between thought and reality. And when this happens repeatedly, the brain rewires. This is called neuroplasticity. Every repeated thought strengthens neural pathways. Every repeated emotional reaction reinforces behavioral patterns. But every moment of conscious observation creates the possibility of a new pathway. Instead of reinforcing fear, awareness interrupts fear. Instead of strengthening anger, awareness softens anger. Instead of deepening unconscious habit, awareness introduces conscious choice. This is how observation changes reality, not through superstition, not through magical thinking, but through the direct transformation of neural, emotional, and behavioral patterns. And yet, there is still something profoundly mysterious about it, because awareness itself remains difficult to explain. Science can measure brain activity. It can observe electrical patterns. It can map neural circuits, but it still cannot fully explain the subjective experience of awareness. What is the eye that notices thought? What is this silent witness? Where does the experience of observing arise from? This is known as the hard problem of consciousness. And despite all our advances, consciousness remains one of the greatest mysteries in existence. We can describe what the brain does, but the fact that there is an experiencer at all remains unexplained. And this is why the silent observer feels so profound. Because when you become aware of awareness itself, you encounter something deeper than thought. You encounter presence, not a belief, not a concept, a direct experience, a moment in which awareness recognizes itself. And in that moment, thought loses its throne. The mind no longer dominates the whole field of reality. Thought becomes one movement within awareness. And awareness becomes the space in which all experience unfolds. This changes everything, because suffering depends on unconscious identification. Stress depends on unconscious belief. Fear depends on unconscious fusion. When awareness sees these processes clearly, the illusion begins to dissolve. The silent observer does not eliminate thought. It transforms your relationship to thought. and that changes your world. Because your world is not shaped only by events. It is shaped by your interpretation of events. And interpretation emerges from thought. If thought is unconscious, reality feels imposed. If thought is observed, reality becomes workable. This is the beginning of inner freedom, and perhaps this is the real quantum shift, not particles changing under observation, but the self changing under awareness. The moment you observe thought, the architecture of identity begins to reorganize. You no longer live as every passing mental event. You begin to live as the awareness in which those events appear. And from that place, reality opens, not because the universe obeys thought, but because awareness liberates perception, and liberated perception creates new possibilities. The silent observer is not passive. It is transformative, because the simple act of witnessing breaks the spell of unconscious thought. And once that spell is broken, reality is no longer fixed. The silent observer and the quantum nature of thought. There is a moment small, almost invisible, between a thought appearing and your reaction to it. Most people never notice that moment. A thought rises, "I am not enough," and instantly, emotion follows. Tension enters the body, the heart rate shifts, attention narrows, behavior changes. The thought becomes reality so quickly that it feels automatic, but hidden inside that tiny gap is one of the most transformative discoveries a person can make. You are not the thought, you are the one aware of the thought. That distinction may seem philosophical, but it carries profound neurological implications, because the moment awareness observes a thought, something extraordinary happens. The thought loses some of its unconscious power. And to understand why, we need to explore how the brain turns thoughts into emotional realities. Thoughts become biology. Very thought creates a corresponding biological response. When you imagine failure, your body responds as if failure is near. When you replay pain, your nervous system reactivates the pain. When you anticipate danger, stress hormones begin to rise. This happens because the brain does not sharply distinguish between external reality and vividly imagined internal experience. From the perspective of your nervous system, focused thought is experience. This is why simply remembering an embarrassing moment can make your stomach tighten. It is why imagining a confrontation can increase your heart rate. It is why worrying about tomorrow can exhaust you today. The body believes the mind. And if repeated thoughts create repeated biological states, then repeated observation of those thoughts can interrupt that process. This is where the silent observer begins to change your reality. Observation interrupts. Identification. Suffering is not caused by thoughts themselves. It is caused by identification with thoughts. To identify with a thought means to unconsciously merge with it. The thought says, "I will fail," and instead of recognizing it as mental activity, consciousness interprets it as truth. The thought becomes identity. This is the mechanism through which inner narratives become outer patterns. A person who repeatedly identifies with insecurity behaves differently than one who observes insecurity. One becomes trapped in the emotional consequences of the thought. The other sees the thought arise without becoming defined by it. This changes behavior, perception, and emotional regulation, and modern neuroscience supports this distinction. Studies on mindfulness and meta-awareness show that observing mental activity activates regions in the prefrontal cortex associated with regulation, perspective, and executive control. Meanwhile, emotional reactivity, especially fear-based responses, often correlates with heightened activation in the amygdala. When awareness watches thought, the regulatory systems of the brain strengthen. When awareness fuses with thought, reactive systems dominate. In simple terms, observation creates regulation, identification creates reaction, and reaction is what keeps old realities alive. The collapse of emotional momentum. Think of an anxious thought as a moving train. If unnoticed, it gathers speed. One fear triggers another, which triggers another, until the emotional state feels overwhelming. This is emotional momentum. but observation interrupts. Momentum, the moment you notice. This is anxiety. You have inserted awareness into the chain. That awareness acts like friction. The thought may still exist, but it no longer accelerates automatically. This is similar to what happens in quantum theory when observation changes the behavior of a system. Before measurement, possibilities remain fluid. After measurement, one state becomes defined. Likewise, before awareness, thought spirals remain unconscious. After awareness, the process becomes visible, and visibility changes the system. You are no longer trapped inside the movement. You are now perceiving the movement. That is the beginning of freedom. Why awareness feels like space when people first practice observing thought. Many describe the same sensation, space, a small gap between themselves and the mental noise. The thoughts may still arise, fear, judgment, comparison, regret, but they no longer feel completely fused with identity. This space is subtle but powerful, because inside that space lies choice. Without space, reaction is automatic. With space, response becomes possible. This is why the observer state is transformative. It creates a pause in the machinery of conditioning. That pause allows a person to decide. Will I believe this thought? Will I act on this fear? Will I repeat this emotional pattern? Without awareness, the answer is automatic. With awareness, the answer becomes conscious, and conscious choices reshape neural pathways. The brain rewires through observation. This is where neuroplasticity enters the conversation. The brain is not fixed. It changes in response to repeated patterns of attention and behavior. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every repeated emotional reaction strengthens the circuits associated with that reaction. Repeated fear strengthens fear pathways. Repeated self-judgment strengthens self-judgment pathways. Repeated stress strengthens stress responses. But repeated observation changes the pattern. Instead of reinforcing the emotional circuit, awareness introduces a new pathway, the pathway of witnessing. The thought appears. Awareness notices. Reaction is reduced. That new sequence, practiced repeatedly, becomes biologically encoded. This means that observing thought is not passive. It is active neural retraining. Every moment of conscious observation weakens automatic conditioning and strengthens conscious regulation. Over time, the brain becomes less reactive, not because thoughts disappear, but because awareness becomes stronger than the thoughts. This is the deeper meaning of mental transformation. You are not forcing the mind to change. You are changing your relationship to the mind. And that changes the brain itself. The observer and emotional energy emotions derive much of their intensity from the stories attached to them. Fear alone is energy, but fear combined with narrative becomes suffering. This fear means I am weak. This fear means something bad will happen. This fear proves I am unsafe. These interpretations amplify the emotional charge, but when the observer notices fear without attaching narrative, the emotion changes. Instead of I am afraid, awareness sees fear is present. That shift is subtle, but it transforms the experience. The emotion is no longer fused with identity. And when identity detaches, intensity often decreases. This is why observing emotion can soften emotion. Awareness removes the layers of meaning that keep emotional energy amplified. In that sense, the observer collapses emotional narratives, the way measurement collapses uncertainty. The stories dissolve. The raw sensation remains. And raw sensation is easier to process than psychological interpretation. This is one of the most liberating realizations in inner work. Much of suffering comes not from emotion, but from unconscious interpretation. And observation reveals that reality reflects internal states. We reach the point where inner observation begins to alter outer reality. Your external life is shaped not only by what happens to you, but by how your internal state guides your perception and actions. A fearful internal state notices threats. An angry internal state notices offense. A hopeless internal state notices barriers. These perceptions influence decisions. Those decisions shape outcomes. This means your inner state is constantly participating in the construction of your outer reality. If observation changes inner state, then observation indirectly changes life outcomes. When awareness interrupts fear, behavior changes. When behavior changes, results change. When results change, reality changes. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is the cumulative effect of perception, behavior, and neurobiology. The silent observer changes the quality of attention. Attention changes interpretation. Interpretation changes action. Action changes reality. So when we say observation changes reality, we are describing a profound chain reaction. Awareness alters the architecture through which life is experienced and created. The end of automatic living without awareness. People live through inherited patterns. They react the way they always reacted. They fear what they always feared. They interpret life through old assumptions. The result is repetitive reality, different days, same emotional patterns. This is why change feels impossible for many people. They attempt to change circumstances without changing consciousness, but circumstances often reflect consciousness. The silent observer breaks repetition, because the moment you witness a pattern, you are no longer fully imprisoned by it. A person who sees their anger in real time can interrupt anger. A person who notices self-sabotage can pause self-sabotage. A person who observes fear can choose courage. Awareness creates the possibility of non-repetition. That possibility is the foundation of transformation. Without awareness, the past repeats itself. With awareness, something new can emerge. And that emergence is what feels like reality shifting, because it is awareness as inner measurement in physics. Measurement reveals the state of a system. In consciousness, awareness reveals the state of the mind, and revealed states can be transformed. What remains unconscious governs behavior invisibly. What becomes conscious enters the field of change. This is why awareness is power, not because it controls reality directly, but because it reveals the mechanisms through which reality is created. If fear remains unconscious, it shapes behavior automatically. If fear becomes conscious, behavior can change. Awareness is the measurement that makes inner mechanisms visible, and visibility is the first stage of transformation. This is the silent power of the observer. It does not force, it illuminates, and what is illuminated no longer hides in AUTOMATICITY. The observer as the beginning of freedom. Freedom is often imagined as the ability to do whatever one wants, but deeper freedom is the ability not to be ruled by unconscious thought. If a thought can dictate your emotions automatically, you are not free. If fear determines your actions without awareness, you are not free. If internal narratives define your identity unconsciously, you are not free. The observer creates freedom because it separates consciousness from compulsion. The thought appears, but awareness remains untouched. The emotion rises, but awareness remains present. The story unfolds, but awareness watches. This inner stability is freedom. And from that freedom, new realities become possible. Because once awareness is stronger than conditioning, choice becomes stronger than habit. That is where personal transformation begins. Becoming the silent observer, where consciousness begins to reshape reality. So far, we have explored an idea that feels almost impossible when first encountered, that simply observing your thoughts can begin to alter the reality you experience, not because thought is magic, not because awareness bends the laws of physics, but because observation changes the inner mechanisms through which your reality is interpreted, embodied, and created. And yet, all of that understanding remains theoretical until it becomes experience, because the true power of the silent observer is not in understanding the concept, it is in becoming the observer directly. This is where the deepest shift happens, not in the intellect. Not in philosophy. But in immediate awareness, because there is a profound difference between knowing that you are not your thoughts and actually experiencing that truth. Intellect can describe the observer, only awareness can reveal it, and once it is revealed, even briefly, the entire structure of identity begins to change. The first direct encounter, most people spend their entire lives inside the stream of thought after thought, reaction after reaction, emotion after emotion. The mind speaks, and life follows. There is no distance, no separation, no witnessing, just total immersion. This is why thought feels like identity. If the mind says, "I am a failure," the person feels like a failure. If the mind says, "Something terrible will happen," the body feels fear. If the mind says, "I am not worthy," emotion obeys, because without awareness, the voice of the mind is experienced as reality. But then something extraordinary can happen. A person pauses, and for the first time, instead of following the thought, they notice it. They recognize that is a thought. This may sound simple, but psychologically, it is revolutionary. Because in that moment, the person is no longer inside the thought. They are aware of the thought. And the moment awareness sees thought, identity begins to separate from mental activity. That is the first direct encounter with the observer. It may last only seconds, but those seconds can transform perception, because the moment awareness becomes aware of thought, consciousness discovers something unexpected. There is a dimension of self deeper than thinking. The 1-minute quantum observation practice to understand this. Imagine a very simple practice. You close your eyes for 1 minute. Nothing complicated. No need to control the breath. No need to force silence. No need to clear the mind. You simply wait and watch. A thought appears. Maybe this is not working. Instead of following it, you notice it. Another thought appears. What am I supposed to feel? Again, you notice it. Then another. I am distracted. Again, you watch. In that moment, something subtle begins to happen. The thoughts continue, but something deeper remains still. The observer does not react. It does not argue. It does not defend. It simply sees. This practice seems small, but its implications are enormous. Because every time you observe a thought without becoming the thought, you weaken unconscious identification. Every time you witness fear without becoming fear, you loosen fear's control. Every time you see anger without becoming anger, you reclaim energy that would otherwise be lost to reaction. This is why the observer transforms reality, because it interrupts unconscious embodiment. Thoughts need identification to control you. A thought by itself has limited power. Its power comes from identification. Consider the thought, "I am not good enough." If this thought is believed unconsciously, emotion follows, behavior changes, confidence drops, action weakens. The thought influences reality because identity fuses with it. But if the same thought is observed, there is the thought that I am not good enough. The process changes. The thought is still present, but awareness creates distance, and in that distance, the thought loses force. This is one of the most powerful truths in consciousness work. Thoughts require unconscious identification to dominate experience. Without identification, they become passing events, clouds moving through awareness, temporary patterns, mental weather. And once thought is seen as weather rather than identity, freedom becomes possible, because no one mistakes a passing cloud for the sky itself. Likewise, awareness begins to recognize that thoughts are movements within consciousness, not the essence of consciousness. That recognition is liberation. The observer changes identity. The more awareness witnesses thought, the more identity shifts. At first, a person believes, "I am my thoughts." Then awareness reveals, "I have thoughts." Eventually, deeper awareness reveals, "I am the awareness in which thoughts appear." This is the fundamental identity shift, and it changes everything, because when identity is rooted in thought, life feels unstable. Thought changes constantly. Emotion changes constantly. Circumstances change constantly. So identity feels fragile. But when identity roots itself in awareness, something new emerges. Stability. Awareness remains present whether thoughts are positive or negative. It remains present whether emotions rise or fall. It remains present whether circumstances improve or collapse. That stability transforms the experience of reality, because suffering is intensified by unstable identity. and awareness creates a deeper center. This is why people often describe the observer state as peace, not because all thoughts disappear, but because identity is no longer tossed around by every thought. Peace is not the absence of mental movement. Peace is the presence of stable awareness. The observer rewrites the future. This identity shift has practical consequences, because your future is shaped by repeated patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. If you repeatedly identify with fear, fear shapes choices. If you repeatedly identify with self-doubt, self-doubt shapes outcomes. If you repeatedly identify with emotional pain, pain shapes patterns. But if awareness interrupts those identifications, the future begins to change. Because choices begin to change, a person who observes fear can act despite fear. A person who observes anger can respond instead of react. A person who observes insecurity can choose differently than insecurity predicts. These small choices alter patterns. Altered patterns create altered outcomes, and altered outcomes become altered reality. So the observer rewrites the future through mystical force, but through liberated action. Awareness creates the space where new behavior becomes possible, and behavior creates the structure of future experience. This is how inner observation becomes outer transformation. Why this feels like reality is changing. When people begin living from awareness, reality often feels different. The world may appear calmer. Time may feel slower. Emotional storms may lose intensity. Choices may feel clearer. And because these changes affect daily experience so deeply, it can feel as if reality itself has shifted. In a meaningful sense, it has, because reality is never experienced raw. It is always filtered through perception. And perception is shaped by consciousness. Change consciousness, and the lived experience of reality changes. The world may be the same, but the perceiver is different, and when the perceiver changes, reality appears transformed. This is one of the deepest truths hidden inside the observer effect metaphor. The act of conscious observation transforms the field of experience, not because matter magically obeys thought, but because awareness changes the one who experiences matter, and that changes everything. The silent observer is always present. Perhaps the most extraordinary part of this discovery, that the observer is not something you create. It is already here. Right now. It was present during every anxious moment you have lived. It was present during every painful memory. It was present in every joyful experience. It has always been the silent witness. The only difference is whether attention recognizes it. You do not build awareness. You notice awareness. You do not manufacture the observer. You awaken to the observer. This is why this shift can happen instantly, because what you are seeking is already present. The observer has been quietly watching your entire life. And the moment you recognize that, something changes forever. Because once awareness recognizes itself, the illusion of total identification weakens. You may still think, you may still feel, you may still struggle, but somewhere within, you know, I am not the storm. I am the awareness in which the storm appears. That knowing changes the entire experience of being human. The final shift at the deepest level, the observer reveals this truth. Your thoughts are events. Your emotions are movements. Your mind is activity. But awareness is the space in which all of it appears. And the more deeply you live from that awareness, the less reality is dictated by unconscious conditioning. This is freedom. Not freedom from thought, but freedom from identification. Not freedom from emotion, but freedom from unconscious reaction. Not freedom from life, but freedom within life. And from that freedom, a different reality begins to emerge. A reality not built by automatic fear, not shaped by inherited patterns, not ruled by unconscious narratives, but shaped by presence. By conscious attention. By the silent observer. This is where transformation begins, not in controlling every thought, not in forcing the mind into silence, but in recognizing the awareness that has always been here. The observer does not fight the mind. It illuminates it. And in that illumination, unconscious patterns lose power. The future opens, possibility expands, reality becomes less mechanical. More conscious, more intentional. More free. So the next time a thought appears in your mind, before believing it, before reacting to it, before allowing it to define your reality, pause and ask, who is noticing this thought? Because in that question lies the doorway to a deeper form of freedom, a freedom hidden in plain sight, a freedom that begins the moment awareness sees itself. And maybe the greatest transformation in your life will not come from changing the world around you, but from discovering the silent observer within you. If this perspective resonated with you, write in the comments, "I am the observer," and tell us, have you ever experienced that moment where watching your thoughts changed what you felt? Because your awareness may be more powerful than you ever imagined. And if you're ready to keep exploring the hidden relationship between consciousness and reality, subscribe to the channel and join us in the next journey beyond the surface of the mind. Until then, keep watching.